One Spanish king was so deformed from inbreeding that he couldn't chew his food. Another hunted elephants while his country starved. And one man, handpicked by a dictator to destroy democracy, ended up saving it. The Spanish monarchy didn't just fall once. It collapsed 3 times. From the last Habsburg who died childless to the king who fled in the night, this crown survived betrayal, exile, and scandal. But will it survive the next generation? The full story is darker than you think. Watch the complex. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a room. Silk curtains. Soft music. Women in beautiful robes. Waiting. That is the Ottoman harem you have seen in movies. Now open your eyes. Because the real harem was nothing like that. It was not a place of pleasure. It was a place of politics. Of silence. Of strategy. And inside those walls, scandals were not about love. They were about life and death. Here is what no one asks. How did a slave girl become the most powerful woman in an empire? Why were princes locked away in cages for decades? And who really decided the fate of the Ottoman sultans? Before we enter those forbidden gates, if you want the story's history tried to hide, subscribe to Little Historical and tap like if you are ready for the truth. Because the scandals of the Ottoman harem are not what you think. They are darker, more dangerous, and completely unforgettable. Let us begin the video using the link in the description. The Ottoman harem you have imagined does not exist. It never did. What you picture as a pleasure den of idle women waiting for a sultan's glance was actually a silent battlefield where one wrong whisper could end a life. And that is the first and most important scandal of all. The myth. Because the real harem was not built for romance. It was built for control. Every silk cushion, every fountain, every locked door served a single purpose. To regulate access to the most dangerous man in the world. The Sultan. And the women inside. They were not lovers competing for attention. They were political operators competing for survival. This misunderstanding did not happen by accident. European travelers who had never stepped inside the harem invented stories of decadence and desire because the truth was too unsettling to print. The truth was that women near power did not cause chaos. They managed it. They memorized alliances, tracked moods, and waited. Always waited. Because in the harem, patience was the deadliest weapon. A woman who rushed toward the sultan's bed disappeared. A woman who watched, listened, and said nothing could outlive empires. Think about that for a moment. The most sought-after prize inside those walls was not the sultan's love. It was the sultan's ear. A single conversation. A brief moment of privacy. And to earn that, a woman had to survive years of scrutiny, rivals, and silence. The harem trained its inhabitants like soldiers. Languages, poetry, music, religion, etiquette. Not for pleasure. For positioning. A woman who recited poetry beautifully was remembered. A woman who remembered everyone's secrets was feared. And a woman who smiled while knowing exactly who had offended whom 3 years ago. She was unstoppable. So when you hear the word scandal, do not think of whispered affairs or jealous fits. Think of a young slave girl learning to read the room before she learned to read the alphabet. Think of a mother watching her son grow while other mothers watched her son fail. Think of a eunuch deciding which message to deliver now and which to lose until morning. That was the real intrigue. Slow, silent, and absolutely unforgiving. The harem did not reward the loudest woman. It rewarded the one who never showed her hand until the game was already over. And that brings us to the first woman who played the game perfectly. A slave who arrived with nothing and died as the most powerful figure in the Ottoman Empire. Her name was Hürrem. And her rise was the scandal that changed everything. Her name was Hürrem, and she arrived as nothing. A slave girl from what is now Ukraine, captured, purchased, and delivered to the Ottoman harem with no status, no allies, and no future anyone would envy. She was not the most beautiful woman in the palace. She was not from a noble family. She had no powerful relatives whispering on her behalf. What she had was something far more dangerous. She understood attention. Most women in the harem did everything possible to avoid being noticed too early. They knew that visibility meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant rivals. But Hürrem did something unexpected. She did not hide. She did not wait quietly. She caught the eye of the most powerful man on earth, Sultan Suleiman, and she did not let go. Not through magic or manipulation. Through presence. She laughed when others were silent. She spoke when others bowed. She reminded the Sultan that he was a man, not just a throne. And that was the first scandal. A slave girl who refused to disappear. But the real intrigue began when Suleiman did something no Ottoman Sultan had done for centuries. He married her. Legally. Publicly. With ceremonies and rings and witnesses. The empire was shocked. Traditionalists called it madness. A sultan was not supposed to marry a slave. He was supposed to take concubines, father heirs, and remain emotionally distant. Love was not part of the calculation. But Hürrem had rewritten the calculation. She was no longer a concubine. She was the queen. And that terrified everyone who had built their careers on the old rules. Yet marriage was only the beginning. Because Hürrem did not want a ring. She wanted power. And power meant securing her son's future over every other prince in the palace. The Sultan already had a brilliant eldest son named Mustafa. Beloved by the army. Respected by the people. Destined for the throne. But Mustafa was not Hürrem's child. So he had to fall. What happened next has been debated for centuries. Did Hürrem whisper lies into the Sultan's ear? Did she forge letters suggesting Mustafa was plotting a coup? Did she slowly, carefully, and patiently poison the Sultan's trust until he saw betrayal in his own son's eyes? No one knows for certain. But we do know this. In 1553, Mustafa was executed by his father's order. Strangled in his tent while his own guards watched. And the woman who had arrived as a slave. Her son became the next sultan. That was not love. That was war. And Hürrem won. Which brings us to the cage where the next scandal was already waiting. After Hürrem's son took the throne, the Ottoman Empire faced an old problem. What do you do with royal brothers who could become rivals? In the early days, the answer was simple and brutal. The new sultan killed every brother he had. Mehmed III famously murdered 19 siblings in a single day. But even empires grow tired of blood. So they invented something worse. The Kafes. The cage. A luxurious prison inside the harem where princes were sent to live. Not for weeks or months. For decades. Imagine growing up knowing you could be the next sultan, but also knowing you would never leave a single building. The cage had beautiful rooms, rich food, and servants. But it had no freedom, no purpose, and no hope. Princes sat behind locked doors watching their youth fade. They took concubines, fathered children, and grew old inside the same few hallways. Some went mad from boredom. Some lost the ability to speak to anyone outside their small circle. And some forgot what sunlight felt like. But here is the dark secret that no one admits. The cage did not just imprison princes. It weaponized their mothers. Because the only way a prince could ever leave the cage was if every other prince died, or if the current sultan died without an heir. And mothers inside the harem understood this math perfectly. So they began to play a new kind of game. Not with swords or armies. With patience and poison. A mother would wait years, sometimes decades, for her moment. She would send secret messages through eunuchs. She would form alliances with other powerful women. She would smile at the sultan while quietly ensuring that his other brothers had accidents, illnesses, or sudden falls from favor. And if her son finally reached the throne after 30 years in the cage, he was often paranoid, untrained, and completely controlled by the woman who had freed him. His own mother. That was the genius of the system. The cage did not prevent ambition. It delayed it, twisted it, and turned it into something far more dangerous than open war. It turned mothers into generals and sons into prisoners. And the woman who mastered this game better than anyone was named Kösem. She did not just survive the cage. She ruled from inside it. And her story is the final scandal. Kösem Sultan did not enter the harem as a slave or a princess. She arrived as a young girl gifted to the palace, beautiful enough to be noticed, but intelligent enough to know that beauty fades. What remains is patience. And patience became her religion. She rose through the ranks not by screaming or seducing, but by watching. She learned who feared whom, who owed whom, who could be trusted and who smiled too easily. By the time she reached the top, she had memorized the harem like a map of weaknesses. Then her son became sultan. And everything changed. Because Kösem did not step back. She stepped forward. Officially, she was the Valide Sultan, the mother of the ruler. Unofficially, she was the ruler. She dismissed grand viziers with a whisper. She negotiated with foreign ambassadors while her son sat silent. She controlled the treasury, the courts, and the flow of information into the sultan's ears. Men who ran empires came to her for approval. And she gave it only when it served her. This was the Sultanate of Women, a half-century when the harem did not just influence the empire. It was the empire. But power built on patience can also be destroyed by a single moment of impatience. And Kösem's moment came when she outlived her own son. Her grandson took the throne, a young man controlled by his own mother, Turhan. Kösem saw her influence slipping. She had spent decades building a system where she was the sun and everyone else orbited around her. Now there was a new queen. A younger queen. A queen who did not owe Kösem anything. So Kösem made a choice that would cost her everything. She plotted to replace her grandson with another prince, a younger boy she could control. It was the same game she had always played. But this time, she was not the only player. Turhan found out. And Turhan did not send guards or generals. She sent something far more intimate. Eunuchs who had served Kösem's household for years. Men who knew every door, every corridor, every moment when Kösem slept alone. In 1651, they entered her bedroom. They dragged the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire from her bed. And they strangled her with a silk cord. A grandmother, murdered inside the harem she had built. The woman who had ruled through patience died because she stopped being patient. That is the final scandal of the Ottoman harem. Not love. Not jealousy. A family killing each other for a throne, using silk and silence instead of swords. And when the killing stopped, the empire had changed forever. The women who followed never held as much power again. The Sultanate of Women ended not with a war, but with a whisper. And a cord.